Most people think Jefferson nickels are just pocket change. But what if I told you that inside your coin jar, there could be a Jefferson nickel worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars today, from rare minting mistakes to low mintage years? These 8 Jefferson nickels are the hidden treasures collectors dream of, and you might already have one without even knowing. 80. And the United States Mint continues one of its longest-running coin traditions, the Jefferson nickel, a coin first introduced in 1938 and still circulating more than 4 decades later. The Jefferson nickel represents not only American currency, but also the story of one of America's most influential founding fathers, a president who doubled the size of the nation with the Louisiana Purchase, authored the Declaration of Independence, and left a legacy that endures on. This humble 5-cent piece, the 1980 Jefferson nickel, may not at first appear extraordinary to the casual observer. It was minted in the billions, and like most modern coins, it quietly moved through the pockets, purses, and cash registers of ordinary Americans, yet hidden beneath its surface lies a fascinating history that collectors, historians, and numismatists examine with great detail. The design of the Jefferson nickel is a creation tied deeply to the 1930s, when the United States Mint sought to replace the Buffalo nickel, a design that, though beloved, had become difficult to strike and often wore down quickly. The Mint announced a design competition in 1938, inviting artists to submit portraits of Thomas Jefferson for the obverse and images of Monticello, his Virginia estate, for the reverse. It was artist Felix Schlag whose submission ultimately won the honor. Schlag's portrait of Jefferson presented a strong left-facing bust, and on the reverse, Monticello appeared as the architectural centerpiece, symbolizing Jefferson's life as a statesman, an architect, and a thinker. This design would endure for decades, and by 1980 it had already been in circulation for 42 years. The 1980 Jefferson nickel was produced at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia struck coins without a mint mark. Denver marked its coins with the D mint mark, while San Francisco produced proof strikes carrying the S mint mark. The Philadelphia and Denver issues were created for general circulation, while San Francisco's proof coins were made for collectors, packaged in special proof sets with mirror-like finishes and frosted details for numismatists. The 1980 issue is interesting for several reasons, though. Not considered rare in circulated grades, the coin plays a role in the broader narrative of Jefferson nickels. In the late 20th century, it was a time when the U.S. Mint was experimenting with minting technology, refining dyes, and preparing for eventual design changes that would come decades later. To understand the 1980 Jefferson nickel, we must look at the historical context of the United States. At that time, the country was entering a new decade marked by political and economic turbulence, inflation and shifting economic policies under President Jimmy Carter, and soon Ronald Reagan coins, such as the nickel, represented stability and commerce. Even while the broader economy fluctuated in 1980, the nickel was still heavily used in vending machines, payphones, parking meters, and daily transactions. Its value, though small, carried immense utility, and as with every year, the Mint's goal was to create durable coins that could withstand heavy use. Millions of 1980 nickels passed through countless hands, each coin a witness to the daily lives of Americans of that era. When it comes to composition, the 1980 Jefferson nickel was struck in the same alloy that had been used since 1866, 75% copper and 25% nickel. This combination gave the coin its durability and distinctive silvery appearance, measuring 21.2 millimeters in diameter and weighing 5 grams. The nickel remained unchanged in size and metallic structure for well over a century, allowing generations of Americans to recognize and use it with ease. But while the 1980 Jefferson nickel was mass-produced, not every coin was identical. Die variations, striking errors, and minting imperfections have always fascinated collectors. The 1980 issue is no exception. Collectors search for examples with full steps on Monticello, a grading designation. indicating that the reverse design struck with sharpness enough to reveal all 6 steps at the base of Jefferson's home. These full-step nickels are difficult to find, especially in higher mint state grades, because most nickels left the dies, without sufficient pressure to show the details. Clearly, the search for such coins is part of what elevates even common-date Jefferson nickels into desirable collector pieces. Beyond the technical details lies the story of Jefferson himself and why his portrait remained on the nickel through 1980 and far beyond. Jefferson was not only the author of the Declaration of Independence, but also a man of profound contradictions, a champion of liberty who owned enslaved people, a visionary who imagined a nation of farmers, yet presided over an era of expansion that brought industrial and political complexities. His image on the nickel represents both admiration and debate, reminding us that coins are not just currency, but carriers of national memory for collectors. Today, the 1980 Jefferson nickel holds value primarily in uncirculated and proof condition. A circulated example typically trades only for face value, yet pristine specimens, especially those graded by professional services such as PCGS or NGC, with the full steps designation, can command far higher premiums, sometimes reaching into the hundreds of dollars. For the finest strikes-proof issues from San Francisco also draw interest, particularly deep cameo specimens. With sharp contrasts between frosted devices and mirrored fields in the wider landscape of coin, collecting the 1980 Jefferson nickel serves as a bridge between earlier and later eras. It reflects the mint's enduring use of Felix Schlag's original design, which would continue until 2003, when Jefferson's portrait and Monticello were both redesigned. It also represents the state of American coinage on the eve of modern changes as technology improved and as the mint prepared to celebrate. Jefferson, differently in the 21st century for anyone studying American coins, the 1980 Jefferson nickel provides a case study in mass production, artistry, design, longevity, and the economics of collecting. It is a coin that embodies both the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary because billions circulated in the pockets of Americans, the extraordinary because each surviving pristine specimen is a reminder of the artistry and precision required to create coins that last decades. The Jefferson nickel as a series is often overlooked compared to silver quarters or rare cents, yet it rewards those who study its history. The 1980 issue is part of that long, unfolding story linking us to Jefferson himself, to the mints, artistry, and to the economic realities of a changing nation. When we consider the 1980 Jefferson nickel, we must first step back to appreciate the design's endurance and its place within the larger story of American coinage, because unlike many coin series that were replaced after only a few decades, the Jefferson nickel carried forward for generations. It was a coin that connected grandparents, parents, and children across the span of time. By 1980, a child could reach into his pocket and find the same Jefferson portrait that his grandfather once carried during World War II. The continuity of the nickel gave it a sense of permanence and familiarity. While other denominations like the cent and the quarter underwent changes, the nickel quietly persisted unchanged in its outward appearance. Yet each date tells its own story, shaped by the year in which it was struck. To understand the 1980 nickel, we must also consider the era in which it was born, the United States. At the dawn of the 1980s was a country wrestling with economic uncertainty. Inflation rates were high, unemployment was a constant worry, and interest rates soared above levels seen in many decades. The Cold War loomed large as tensions with the Soviet Union influenced global policy, and Americans were entering a decade that would soon see a dramatic shift in leadership, with Ronald Reagan's election coins minted during this time thus served as tiny artifacts of a society caught between change and continuity. While bills came and went, coins maintained their steady presence, and the nickel above all served as a workhorse coin in vending machines, in laundromats, in phone booths, and in grocery stores. The Philadelphia Mint in 1980 struck more than 500 million Jefferson nickels without a mint mark, and the Denver Mint produced even more, surpassing 600 million coins combined. This meant that over 1 billion 1980 nickels entered circulation, a staggering figure that reflects the coin's role in daily commerce. But despite such high production numbers, true collectors know that not all coins are created equal. While the vast majority became worn through pocket use, a much smaller number survived in mint condition, carefully preserved. By collectors or overlooked in original bankrolls, these uncirculated pieces provide a window into the precision of the minting process in that year. The year is 1980, and the United States Mint continues one of its longest-running coin traditions, the Jefferson nickel, a coin first introduced in 1938 and still circulating more than 4 decades later. The Jefferson nickel represents not only American currency, but also the story of one of America's most influential founding fathers, a president who doubled the size of the nation with the Louisiana Purchase, authored the Declaration of Independence, and left a legacy that endures on. This humble 5-cent piece, the 1980 Jefferson nickel, may not at first appear extraordinary to the casual observer. It was minted in the billions, and like most modern coins, it quietly moved through the pockets, purses, and cash registers of ordinary Americans, yet hidden beneath its surface lies a fascinating history that collectors, historians, and numismatists examine with great detail. The design of the Jefferson nickel is a creation tied deeply to the 1930s, when the United States Mint sought to replace the Buffalo nickel, a design that, though beloved, had become difficult to strike and often wore down quickly. The Mint announced a design competition in 1938, inviting artists to submit portraits of Thomas Jefferson for the obverse and images of Monticello, his Virginia estate, for the reverse. It was artist Felix Schlag whose submission ultimately won the honor. Schlag's portrait of Jefferson presented a strong left-facing bust, and on the reverse, Monticello appeared as the architectural centerpiece, symbolizing Jefferson's life as a statesman, an architect, and a thinker. This design would endure for decades, and by 1980 it had already been in circulation for 42 years. The 1980 Jefferson nickel was produced at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia struck coins without a mint mark. Denver marked its coins with the D mint mark, while San Francisco produced proof strikes carrying the S mint mark. The Philadelphia and Denver issues were created for general circulation, while San Francisco's proof coins were made for collectors, packaged in special proof sets with mirror-like finishes and frosted details for numismatists. The 1980 issue is interesting for several reasons, though. Not considered rare in circulated grades, the coin plays a role in the broader narrative of Jefferson nickels. In the late 20th century, it was a time when the U.S. Mint was experimenting with minting technology, refining dyes, and preparing for eventual design changes that would come decades later. To understand the 1980 Jefferson nickel, we must look at the historical context of the United States. At that time, the country was entering a new decade marked by political and economic turbulence, inflation and shifting economic policies under President Jimmy Carter, and soon Ronald Reagan coins, such as the nickel, represented stability in commerce. Even while the broader economy fluctuated in 1980, the nickel was still heavily used in vending, machines, payphones, parking meters, and daily transactions. Its value, though small, carried immense utility, and as with every year, the Mint's goal was to create durable coins that could withstand heavy use. Millions of 1980 nickels passed through countless hands, each coin a witness to the daily lives of Americans of that era. When it comes to composition, the 1980 Jefferson nickel was struck in the same alloy that had been used since 1866, 75% copper and 25% nickel. This combination gave the coin its durability and distinctive silvery appearance. Measuring 21.2 millimeters in diameter and weighing 5 grams, the nickel remained unchanged in size and metallic structure for well over a century, allowing generations of Americans to recognize and use it with ease. But while the 1980 Jefferson nickel was mass-produced, not every coin was identical. Die variations, striking errors, and minting imperfections have always fascinated collectors. The 1980 issue is no exception. Collectors search for examples with full steps on Monticello, a grading designation, indicating that the reverse design struck with sharpness enough to reveal all 6 steps at the base of Jefferson's home. These full-step nickels are difficult to find, especially in higher mint state grades, because most nickels left the dies without sufficient pressure to show the details. Clearly, the search for such coins is part of what elevates even common-date Jefferson nickels into desirable collector pieces. Beyond the technical details lies the story of Jefferson himself and why his portrait remained on the nickel through 1980 and far beyond. Jefferson was not only the author of the Declaration of Independence, but also a man of profound contradictions, a champion of liberty who owned enslaved people, a visionary who imagined a nation of farmers, yet presided over an era of expansion that brought industrial and political complexities. His image on the nickel represents both admiration and debate, reminding us that coins are not just currency, but carriers of national memory for collectors. Today, the 1980 Jefferson nickel holds value primarily in uncirculated and proof condition. A circulated example typically trades only for face value, yet pristine specimens, especially those graded by professional services such as PCGS or NGC, with the full steps designation, can command far higher premiums, sometimes reaching into the hundreds of dollars. For the finest strikes-proof issues from San Francisco also draw interest, particularly deep cameo specimens. With sharp contrasts between frosted devices and mirrored fields in the wider landscape of coin, collecting the 1980 Jefferson nickel serves as a bridge between earlier and later eras. It reflects the mint's enduring use of Felix Schlag's original design, which would continue until 2003, when Jefferson's portrait and Monticello were both redesigned. It also represents the state of American coinage on the eve of modern changes as technology improved and as the mint prepared to celebrate. Jefferson, differently in the 21st century for anyone studying American coins, the 1980 Jefferson nickel provides a case study in mass production, artistry, design, longevity, and the economics of collecting. It is a coin that embodies both the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary because billions circulated in the pockets of Americans, the extraordinary because each surviving pristine specimen is a reminder of the artistry and precision required to create coins that last decades. The Jefferson nickel as a series is often overlooked compared to silver quarters or rare cents, yet it rewards those who study its history. The 1980 issue is part of that long, unfolding story linking us to Jefferson himself, to the mints, artistry, and to the economic realities of a changing nation. When we consider the 1980 Jefferson nickel, we must first step back to appreciate the design's endurance and its place within the larger story of American coinage, because unlike many coin series that were replaced after only a few decades, the Jefferson nickel carried forward for generations. It was a coin that connected grandparents, parents, and children across the span of time. By 1980, a child could reach into his pocket and find the same Jefferson portrait that his grandfather once carried during World War II. The continuity of the nickel gave it a sense of permanence and familiarity. While other denominations like the cent and the quarter underwent changes, the nickel quietly persisted unchanged in its outward appearance. Yet each date tells its own story, shaped by the year in which it was struck. To understand the 1980 nickel, we must also consider the era in which it was born, the United States. At the dawn of the 1980s was a country wrestling with economic uncertainty. Inflation rates were high, unemployment was a constant worry, and interest rates soared above levels seen in many decades. The Cold War loomed large as tensions with the Soviet Union influenced global policy, and Americans were entering a decade that would soon see a dramatic shift in leadership, with Ronald Reagan's election coins minted during this time thus served as tiny artifacts of a society caught between change and continuity. While bills came and went, coins maintained their steady presence, and the nickel above all served as a workhorse coin in vending machines, in laundromats, in phone booths, and in grocery stores. The Philadelphia Mint in 1980 struck more than 500 million Jefferson nickels without a mint mark, and the Denver Mint produced even more, surpassing 600 million coins combined. This meant that over 1 billion 1980 nickels entered circulation, a staggering figure that reflects the coin's role in daily commerce. But despite such high production numbers, true collectors know that not all coins are created equal. While the vast majority became worn through pocket use, a much smaller number survived in mint condition, carefully preserved by collectors or overlooked in original bankrolls. These uncirculated pieces provide a window into the precision of the minting process in that year. In the world of American coinage, few designs carry such a blend of historic symbolism, enduring artistry, and everyday familiarity as the Jefferson nickel. And when we turn our attention to the year 1990, we find not just a piece of 5-cent currency, but a coin that reflects decades of numismatic tradition, technological change, and the story of a founding father who remains a pillar in the American imagination. The Jefferson nickel was first introduced in 1938 when it replaced the Buffalo nickel. After the Treasury held a design competition that invited sculptors and engravers from across the nation, the winning design was by Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor whose vision brought forth the profile of Thomas Jefferson III, President of the United States, a man celebrated for his authorship of the Declaration of Independence and his dedication to the principles of democracy, liberty, and learning. The obverse of the Jefferson nickel presents his bust facing left-modeled, after the Rembrandt Peale portrait and etched with the inscriptions, "In God we trust liberty," and the date, while the reverse until 2004 carried the neoclassical depiction of Monticello Jefferson's home in Virginia, designed with careful architectural detail and engraved with the mottos, United States of America, E pluribus unum, and 5 cents. By the time the 1990 Jefferson nickel was minted, this design had already been in circulation for over 50 years, making it one of the most recognized coin designs in American history. The 1990 Jefferson nickel belongs to the later era of the Schlag design, an era defined by advances in minting technology that allowed for sharper detail and mass production, but also by the debates among numismatists about whether the design should be modernized to better capture Jefferson's likeness and Monticello's architecture produced at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints. The 1990 issue included millions of examples struck for circulation as well, as proof versions crafted at the San Francisco Mint with a mirrored finish and frosted devices that appealed to collectors. To understand the importance of this coin, we must place it in the context of the late 20th century when American coinage was undergoing subtle but important transitions. The 1980s had seen the growing popularity of proof and mint sets, the rise of third-party grading services like PCGS and NGC, and a new generation of collectors driven not just by history, but by investment potential. The Jefferson nickel, though not made of silver, since the end of World War II continued to attract attention because of its long-running design, the prominence of Jefferson's image, and the fact that high-grade examples, especially in full steps condition, could command strong premiums. The full steps designation refers to the steps leading up to Monticello on the reverse of the coin. When the dies were well prepared and the strike was crisp, collectors could count all 6 steps, clearly defined, a detail often lost in circulation strikes due to wear or weak striking pressure in the 1990 Jefferson nickel. The challenge of finding well-struck full-step examples has created an area of intense study among specialists. These nickels in MS-66 or MS-67 with full steps can be far more valuable than common circulation pieces, sometimes fetching hundreds of dollars in auctions. What makes the Jefferson nickel so compelling is that it stands at the crossroads of art history, politics, and economy. Jefferson himself is a figure of extraordinary influence. His vision for America as a nation of educated citizens, his founding of the University of Virginia, his embrace of Enlightenment ideals, and his lasting contributions to architecture and agriculture all make his presence on the nickel deeply symbolic. In 1990, This symbolism resonated as America approached the end of the Cold War, the bicentennial anniversaries of many founding-era milestones and a renewed interest in the ideals of democracy. From a metallurgical standpoint, the 1990 Jefferson nickel is composed of a copper-nickel alloy, 75% copper and 25% nickel, a composition first adopted during the introduction of the coin. In 1938, except for the war years of 1942 to 1945, when silver was used due to wartime needs, the alloy has proven durable, resistant to corrosion, and practical for mass circulation. And so the 1990 edition, like its predecessors, carries not just the image of Jefferson, but also the tradition of utility and resilience built into American coinage. When examining the coinage process of 1990, we can also note the mint's reliance on more advanced die-making equipment, improved planche preparation, and better quality control, which contributed to the sharpness of proof issues and the wide distribution of circulation strikes. However, despite these advancements, die wear and mass production still led to variations that collectors seek today. From doubled dies and repunched mint marks to minor planche flaws, a 2-hour exploration of the 1990 Jefferson nickel allows us to not only trace the story of this specific issue, but also to connect it to the broader sweep of American numismatic history. We can discuss the origins of the nickel denomination, itself first introduced in 1866 with the shield nickel. We can trace the progression through the Liberty Head nickel from 1883 to 1913, the Buffalo nickel from 1913 to 1938, and the Jefferson nickel from 1938 to the present. Each step in this evolution reflects changes in artistry, economy, and national identity, and by the time we reach the 1990 coin, we are not just holding 5 cents but more than a century of coinage development. We can also place Jefferson's image alongside other founding fathers in coinage: Washington on the quarter, Lincoln on the cent, Franklin on the half-dollar, and see how American coinage in the 20th century used national leaders to anchor the everyday currency in a sense of shared history. The 1990 Jefferson nickel becomes even more interesting when we turn to its place in modern collections. Thousands of collectors seek out high-grade examples. Registry sets encourage competition for the finest coins, and numismatic literature has documented in painstaking detail the varieties, die states, and striking qualities. Of this year, these nickels, though common in pocket change, can in pristine condition serve as trophies in serious collections, a reflection of the fact that rarity in modern numismatics is often not about absolute scarcity, but about condition and strike quality. Furthermore, the proof issues from San Francisco offer a window into the mint's craftsmanship. The mirrored fields, the frosted reliefs, and the careful packaging in annual proof sets demonstrate the dual nature of American coinage in 1990, practical for commerce yet artistic for collectors. When presenting this story on a platform like Rare American Coins, the hook lies in revealing to viewers that the coins they might overlook in everyday change hold layers of history, artistry, and hidden value. The 1990 Jefferson nickel is not just a 5-cent piece. It is a monument to Jefferson. It is a continuation of Schlag's design legacy. It is a reflection of minting technology at the close of the 20th century, and it is a collectible that connects the casual hobbyist to the most advanced numismatist. By taking viewers through this journey, one can fill 2 hours with discussion of Jefferson's biography, the design competition of 1938, the war nickel composition, the evolution of the nickel denomination, the grading standards of the 1980s and 1990s, the hunt for full steps, the economics of modern collecting, and the cultural role of coins as miniature works of history. Thus, when the viewer encounters the 1990 Jefferson nickel on Rare American Coins, they are not merely learning about a date and mint mark, they are stepping into a living museum of American heritage. A museum that sits quietly in the palm of the hand, passed in change, forgotten in jars, but treasured by those who know how to look closely. In the world of numismatics, few coins carry the quiet intrigue and hidden depth of the Jefferson nickel, minted in 1977. A coin that might at first glance appear ordinary, but which carries within its design, history, and composition a story that reaches back to the very foundations of American coinage, monetary reform, economic stability, and even the evolving identity of the United States itself. To understand the 1977 Jefferson nickel, we must first understand the legacy of the nickel as a denomination in American currency. The origins of the nickel can be traced back to the turmoil of the Civil War when precious metal shortages and hoarding forced the United States Mint to experiment with new compositions and designs. Before this period, 5-cent pieces were made of silver and were known as half-dimes. But as silver became scarce and the public began to distrust paper currency, the government sought a durable base metal solution. Thus was born the nickel, first introduced in 1866 with the Shield nickel and eventually transformed into the Liberty Head nickel, followed by the famous Buffalo nickel in 1913. The Buffalo nickel, with its iconic Native American portrait and American bison reverse, carried the denomination until 1938, when the Jefferson nickel made its debut. The Jefferson nickel was the product of a national design competition in 1938, following the Treasury Department's decision to replace the Buffalo design. After 25 years, Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor, won the contest with his portrayal of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his design of Jefferson's Virginia home Monticello on the reverse. This design endured through war, inflation, and social change remaining. A constant fixture in the hands of Americans, the coin became even more significant during World War II, when the U.S. Mint altered its composition to include silver in order to preserve nickel for wartime industries. But after 1946, the nickel returned to its original copper-nickel alloy, and by 1977, the design had become a symbol of stability and continuity. The year 1977 itself provides a unique backdrop for this coin. America was in the midst of economic challenges. The lingering effects of the oil crisis, inflation, and changes in global trade were affecting the economy. The bicentennial celebrations of 1976 had just concluded, and the U.S. Mint had returned to producing its standard coinage after the special commemorative issues of the bicentennial years. While the quarter, half dollar, and dollar had celebrated the 200th anniversary of independence, the humble nickel quietly continued with its Jefferson Monticello design unaltered. Yet in this continuity lies the fascinating story of the 1977 issue. The 1977 Jefferson nickel was struck at 3 mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark. Denver coins were marked with a D, and San Francisco coins were produced in proof sets bearing the U.S. Mint mark. The Philadelphia and Denver issues were made for circulation, while the San Francisco proofs were specially struck with polished dies and planchets to create coins of superior detail and finish the total mintage of the 1977 Jefferson. Nickel was in the hundreds of millions, making it a common coin for circulation. Yet the value of this coin does not lie only in its rarity, but in its context and in the finer details of die varieties, errors, and condition that collectors prize. The design itself in 1977 still reflected Felix Schlag's original work, though the details of Monticello on the reverse had become somewhat weaker over the years due to repeated hubbing and die wear. Nonetheless, Jefferson's left-facing portrait continued to embody the ideals of enlightenment, leadership, and democratic principles for which he is remembered. Coins of this year have been studied closely for variations, such as doubled dies, repunched mint marks, off-center strikes, broad strikes, and other minting anomalies. These era coins can fetch significant premiums on the numismatic market, far exceeding the face value of 5 cents. Beyond the technical details, the 1977 Jefferson nickel also speaks to the cultural and historical environment of the late 1970s. America was a nation searching for confidence after Watergate and the Vietnam War. President Jimmy Carter had just taken office, bringing a promise of honesty and new leadership. The economy was experiencing stagflation, and the U.S. Mint itself was undergoing technological modernization, improving press machinery and refining minting techniques. Within this broader story, the nickel represents not only currency, but also continuity, a small yet enduring piece of metal that tied everyday transactions to the long sweep of American history. For collectors, the 1977 Jefferson nickel represents a fascinating entry point into a series that has been overlooked by many, yet offers great depth. The Jefferson nickel series spans decades, providing opportunities to study historical changes in design composition and minting techniques. The 1977 issue is relatively accessible, making it an excellent starting point for new collectors, while specialists can pursue high-grade mint state examples, full-step designations on Monticello, and rare error varieties grading is particularly important with Jefferson nickels, because while most circulated examples have little premium high-grade coins, especially those certified by major grading services with designations like MS67 or higher, can command strong prices to create a complete picture of the 1977 nickel. One must also look at the broader coin collecting trends of the 1970s. This was a time when the hobby of coin collecting experienced a surge in popularity, fueled by the bicentennial coin program, the increased availability of coin albums and reference guides, and a growing network of coin shows, dealers, and clubs. The Jefferson nickel was part of this culture. Even though it was not spotlighted with a commemorative design, its stability and continued circulation made it a familiar face in every pocket across the country. Many Americans who came of age in the 1970s remember using these coins daily for candy soda bus fare and countless other transactions. Thus, the 1977 nickel carries with it a wave of nostalgia and memory. As we examine this coin in detail, we must also reflect on the broader role of coinage as both a medium of exchange and a cultural artifact. The 1977 Jefferson nickel is not merely a 5-cent piece. It is a symbol of America's enduring institutions, a reflection of the artistry of Felix Schlag, a reminder of the resilience of the U.S. Mint through decades of change, and a tangible connection to the lives of millions of Americans who handled it in their daily routines in the world of numismatics. What may seem ordinary can become extraordinary when placed in historical and cultural perspective. For collectors today, the 1977 Jefferson nickel offers an abundance of stories to uncover, whether through the study of mint marks and varieties, the pursuit of pristine proof coins from San Francisco, or the hunt for elusive full-step designations from Denver and Philadelphia. The coin is a reminder that rarity is not the only measure of value. Significance, history, artistry, and cultural meaning all play roles in defining why a coin matters and why it deserves attention. In the vast story of American coinage, there is a coin that carries the weight of a nation's history, its economic struggles, its artistic ambitions, and its place in the pocket of nearly every citizen. This coin is the Jefferson nickel, and the year 1972 marked an important chapter in its long journey. The Jefferson nickel, first introduced in 1938, was designed to honor Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States, and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. When the coin entered circulation, it replaced the Buffalo nickel, which had been in use since 1913. The new design was created by sculptor Felix Schlag, whose work was chosen after a public competition and featured the familiar portrait of Jefferson. On the obverse, while the reverse displayed his Virginia home, Monticello, a neoclassical architectural masterpiece that stood as a symbol of Jefferson's vision for America. By the time the 1972 nickel was struck, the coin had already become a staple of American life. It was produced in massive quantities at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, and while many people think of it simply as pocket change, numismatists and historians recognize it as a tangible artifact that captures the economic climate of the early 1970s. The year 1972 was a turbulent one in American history. The Vietnam War was ongoing. The Watergate scandal was beginning to unfold, and the United States economy was experiencing high inflation, which had a direct impact on coinage and currency in circulation. Every coin minted that year, including the Jefferson nickel, carried with it the echoes of those national challenges. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 217 million nickels in 1972. The Denver Mint produced over 351 million, and the San Francisco Mint struck more than 150 million proofs, and circulation strikes combined. These figures show just how necessary and heavily used this coin was in everyday life. But beyond sheer numbers, the 1972 Jefferson nickel has become a subject of fascination for collectors because of its varieties errors and its context in the broader numismatic landscape. While the coin was composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel, just like previous years, it was part of a generation of coins that reflected the economic pressures of the time. Since the removal of silver from most U.S. coins in the mid-1960s, collectors and the general public were still adjusting to a coinage system based on base metals alone. The design of the 1972 Jefferson nickel, while seemingly ordinary, also carries subtle details that make it distinct. Schlage's portrait of Jefferson faces left his stern gaze reflecting the idealism of the founding father, but also hinting at the struggles of the modern nation. Monticello on the reverse is rendered with precision, but in 1972 the dies sometimes wore quickly, leading to weak strikes and blurred details. This is why many circulated nickels from that year show only faint details on the steps of Monticello, an area that would later become a major point of interest for collectors who seek the so-called full-step nickels. The concept of full steps refers to the number of distinct steps visible at the base of Monticello. When a nickel is struck fully and sharply, 5 or 6 full steps can be clearly seen. This detail might seem minor, but it is a hallmark of strike quality, and 1972 nickels with full steps are far rarer than typical strikes, making them highly desirable in the numismatic market. Beyond strike quality, 1972 nickels are also notable for certain die varieties, one of the most famous being doubled. Die obverse coins occur when the hubbing process misaligns the design elements, leading to noticeable doubling on the letters or numbers. In 1972, nickels with doubling in the inscriptions such as, "In God We Trust Liberty" or the date are prized by collectors and can be worth many multiples of their face value error. Coins also play a crucial role in the story of the 1972 Jefferson nickel, with examples of off-center strikes, clipped planchets, die cracks, and other minting anomalies. Each of these errors provides a glimpse into the minting process of the era and reflects both the immense production demands placed on the mints and the imperfections inherent in a system that was still largely mechanical rather than computerized. But to truly understand the 1972 Jefferson nickel, we must also step back and consider the cultural and economic environment of the United States. At that time, in 1972, Richard Nixon was re-elected as president, but his administration was already under the shadow of Watergate. The country was deeply divided over the war in Vietnam, and inflation was eroding the purchasing power of everyday Americans. A nickel still bought a small snack or paid for part of a phone call, yet its value was diminishing compared to previous decades. The Jefferson nickel, in this sense, represents both continuity and change. It carried forward a design that had become iconic, yet it circulated in a nation that was rapidly transforming in technology, culture, and politics. Jefferson himself, a man of contradictions who believed in liberty yet owned slaves, who championed small government yet expanded federal power through the Louisiana Purchase, seemed an apt figure to grace America's 5-cent piece during such a conflicted era. When we examine the 1972 Jefferson nickel, we are not merely looking at a coin. We are exploring the intersection of history, economics, and artistry. It is a story of mass production yet individual uniqueness. Every coin tells its own story, whether through the hands it passed, the errors it carries, or the clarity of its strike. And for collectors, the hunt for a pristine full step 1972 nickel, or a rare doubled die variety, becomes a quest for connecting with that larger history over the decades since its minting. The 1972 nickel has remained common in circulation, though examples in mint state or proof condition have become prized possessions in numismatic circles. Grading services such as PCGS and NGC evaluate these coins carefully, with high-grade full-step examples commanding hundreds or even thousands of dollars depending on their rarity and demand. This journey from an everyday coin to a collectible artifact highlights the importance of even the most ordinary-seeming pieces of money coins like the 1972 Jefferson nickel remind us that history is not only recorded in books and monuments, but also in the small metallic tokens we carry in our pockets. They are democratic objects accessible to everyone, yet full of meaning for those who look closer. And so the 1972 Jefferson nickel stands today as more than just 5 cents. It is a window into the America of the early 1970s, a nation grappling with war, scandal, inflation, and cultural upheaval, yet still rooted in the ideals of its founders, a nation where, even in the smallest coin, we can find echoes of its triumphs and struggles, its creativity and imperfections, its continuity and change. When you hold a Jefferson nickel from 1972, you may see nothing more than a small round piece of metal yet hidden. Within this ordinary coin lies an extraordinary story, a story that connects the founding ideals of the United States with the struggles of the 20th century. A story that blends artistry, politics, economics, and human ambition into one enduring object. The Jefferson nickel has been with Americans since 1938, replacing the proud Buffalo nickel that had circulated since 1913. When the Treasury called for a new design in the late 1930s, it was an attempt to honor one of the most influential figures in American history, Thomas Jefferson, the man who penned the Declaration of Independence, who served as president, who doubled the size of the United States through the Louisiana Purchase, and who envisioned a nation of independent farmers and citizens free from tyranny. When Felix Schlag submitted his design, he could not have imagined that his coin would remain in circulation for decades. His vision of Jefferson's portrait facing left, gazing toward the horizon, and Monticello on the reverse would come to symbolize not only Jefferson himself, but also the continuity of the American Republic and the values it stood for as the years passed. The Jefferson nickel would see minor adjustments, but its essence remained, and by the year 1972, the coin was firmly entrenched in the fabric of American daily life. In the vast world of American numismatics, every coin tells a story that goes beyond its simple face value. And the Jefferson nickel of 1983 is no exception, because it represents not only a piece of currency used in everyday transactions, but also a chapter in the history of American coinage that reflects changes in design minting technology and the economy of the early 1980s. This coin, which bears the portrait of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, is part of a long and storied series that began in 1938. When the United States Mint introduced the Jefferson nickel to replace the Buffalo nickel. The decision to honor Jefferson was not random. It was part of a broader movement in American coinage to celebrate founding fathers and historical figures who played pivotal roles in shaping the nation. Jefferson was not only the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, but also a statesman, diplomat, architect, and thinker whose vision of democracy and liberty deeply influenced the trajectory of the United States and his home. Monticello became a symbol of both his intellect and his contradictions. As a slave-holding champion of freedom by 1983, the Jefferson nickel had already been in circulation for 45 years and had become a familiar sight in the pockets, purses, and cash registers of millions of Americans. Yet the year 1983 holds particular significance for collectors and historians because it was a period of transition in American coinage. The late 1970s and early 1980s saw significant economic challenges, including inflation, energy crises, and debates about the cost of producing certain coins, while the nickel itself continued to be struck in the standard composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. Its role within the broader economy was changing as the purchasing power of 5 cents declined. The design of the 1983 nickel remained faithful to the original work of Felix Schlag the German, born sculptor, who won the 1938 design competition. Schlag's portrait of Jefferson facing left with his hair tied back in a queue, and the stately image of Monticello on the reverse had become iconic, although in later decades critics would note that the details of the design often suffered from weak strikes, especially in the depiction of Monticello, where lines could appear flat or blurry, and in 1983, those production issues remained an ongoing concern for collectors who sought sharp. Examples of the coin: the Mint produced Jefferson nickels at both Philadelphia and Denver in 1983, with no nickels struck at San Francisco for circulation, though proof versions were made at the San Francisco Mint for collectors, and herein lies one of the fascinating aspects of the 1983 nickel, because in that year, the United States Mint did not produce official mint sets, a decision tied to budgetary and production considerations. As a result, high-quality uncirculated coins from 1983 are relatively scarce. When compared to surrounding years, this scarcity has elevated the desirability of 1983 nickels in pristine condition, because while millions were minted, finding examples with clean surfaces, strong strikes, and minimal contact marks is a true challenge for collectors and investors. This makes the 1983 nickel an intriguing case study in how availability and distribution, rather than mintage numbers alone, can shape a coin's long-term value. To truly understand the importance of the 1983 nickel, one must place it within the context of American society. At that time, Ronald Reagan was serving his first term as president. The Cold War still dominated geopolitics. The American economy was undergoing significant shifts, and technology was beginning to change how people lived and worked. Yet through all of this, the humble nickel retained its role as a workhorse coin used in vending machines, bus fares, arcades, diners, and small shops. It was a coin that circulated heavily and bore the marks of daily life. And this heavy circulation is precisely why uncirculated examples are scarce. Most 1983 nickels were spent and worn down, leaving fewer survivors in the highest grades. Numismatists often look at coins not just as objects, but as witnesses to history, and the 1983 Jefferson nickel is indeed a witness to an era when America was struggling with inflation, but also experiencing technological optimism and cultural change. The coin silently passed from hand to hand, carrying the face of Jefferson and the image of Monticello into grocery stores, schools, post offices, and movie theaters across the country. Collectors examining the details of a 1983 nickel will notice that strike quality varies considerably between the Philadelphia and Denver issues, with Philadelphia coins often displaying weaker strikes, particularly in the steps of Monticello on the reverse. These steps are a key diagnostic area for collectors because fully struck steps are rare and highly sought after. The so-called full step designation is a hallmark of quality in Jefferson nickel collecting, and a 1983 nickel with full steps is a prized find indeed because it demonstrates not only careful striking but also survival. Without heavy contact in circulation, the Denver Mint coins, by contrast, tend to have stronger strikes. But even so, the challenges of finding high-grade examples remain. Another aspect worth exploring is the role of proof coins. In 1983, the San Francisco Mint produced proof Jefferson nickels in brilliant mirror-like finishes designed specifically for collectors. These coins never entered circulation and thus survive in much higher quality. However, they are not considered rare in the same way as circulation strikes. Instead, their beauty lies in their presentation with frosted devices and deep mirrored fields that showcase the artistry of the Jefferson design. The proof nickels of 1983 remind us that the United States Mint has long balanced its duty to produce functional coinage for commerce with its role in serving the collector community. What also makes the 1983 nickel a coin of interest is the lack of mint sets that year, which created a gap in the continuity of collecting for many hobbyists. Mint sets had long been a way for families and collectors to obtain pristine examples of each year's coinage directly from the mint. But the absence of such sets in 1982 and 1983 forced collectors to seek out coins from bank rolls, and circulation adding an element of challenge that elevated the importance of these issues in the eyes of numismatists. This difficulty is what sets the 1983 nickel apart, because the journey of acquiring it in high grade is almost as significant as the coin itself. The Jefferson nickel series has always attracted a loyal following because it offers both historical depth and affordability. Most dates are accessible to collectors of all levels. Yet, within the series there are challenging dates and conditions that test the dedication of enthusiasts, and the 1983 nickel is firmly within that category. Some may argue that a modern nickel has little to offer compared to older silver or gold coins, but in truth, the value of a coin is not solely in its metal content but in its story, and the 1983 Jefferson nickel carries with it a story of scarcity amidst abundance, a story of collectors searching tirelessly for sharp strikes and full steps, a story of a nation in the midst of economic challenges, but still producing coinage that linked back to one of its most important founding fathers. The long history of the Jefferson nickel itself also enhances the significance of the 1983 issue when Schlag designed the coin in 1938. He could not have imagined that his work would endure into the 21st century with relatively few modifications. The 1983 nickel, therefore, is both a continuation of tradition and a snapshot of a particular moment in numismatic history. By examining this coin, we are reminded of how everyday objects can become valuable touchstones of the past, and how collectors, through their passion for detail, preserve the stories embedded within these small metallic discs. Today, when collectors hunt for 1983 nickels in top grades, they are participating in a tradition that stretches back generations, a tradition of searching, studying, comparing, and appreciating coins not only as monetary tools but as cultural artifacts. The thrill of discovering a 1983 nickel with full steps or a brilliant uncirculated luster is the thrill of connecting with history and ensuring that the story of this coin will endure for future generations. In the rich tapestry of American coinage history, the Jefferson nickel holds a unique place, not only because of its long-standing presence in circulation, but also because of the way it reflects the character of the nation through both its design and the years of minting. When we look closely at the year 1984, the Jefferson nickel may at first appear like an ordinary everyday coin, one that passed unnoticed in the pockets and purses of millions of Americans. Yet when we pull back the curtain and study its origins, its design, its production history, and the larger events of its time, we begin to uncover a much deeper and more fascinating story, a story that reaches back to the founding fathers and forward into the modern era of minting technology. The Jefferson nickel first emerged in 1938, replacing the beloved Buffalo nickel, which had itself become a symbol of the American frontier by the late 1930s. The Buffalo design, though iconic, was difficult to strike consistently, and the U.S. Mint sought a change. The new design contest called for a portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and an image of his Virginia home Monticello on the reverse. Felix Schlag, a German-American sculptor, won the competition. His depiction of Jefferson offered a stately left-facing profile, while Monticello stood proudly on the reverse, symbolizing Jefferson's dedication to architecture innovation and his role as a statesman. Fast forward nearly half a century to 1984. The Jefferson nickel was, by then, a familiar sight in every American household. It was struck at three major facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia mint coins carried no mint mark in that era. The Denver Mint used the D mark, and San Francisco issued proof coins with the S mint mark. The composition of the 1984 nickel was the same as it had been since 1946, consisting of 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving it a silvery look despite lacking any real silver. Content to understand the significance of the 1984 Jefferson nickel. We must look beyond the metal and examine the context of the United States. At the time, Ronald Reagan was president. The Cold War was still an ever-present reality. The economy was undergoing shifts in industry and technology, and coin collecting was quietly gaining momentum among Americans. The nickel represented continuity. It was a link back to the vision of Jefferson, a founding father who valued democracy, science, and innovation. The coin carried his image every year, reminding Americans of his contributions while also serving as a tool of commerce that passed hand to hand in grocery stores, gas stations, diners, and banks. One of the intriguing aspects of the 1984 nickel lies in its production numbers. More than 1 billion nickels were struck that year, combined between Philadelphia and Denver, making it a common coin in terms of availability. Yet within that massive mintage, we find fascinating varieties and errors that spark collector interest. Some 1984 nickels reveal misstrikes, double dies, and weak strikes, where details of Jefferson's hair or Monticello's steps appear blurry or doubled. These errors, while accidental at the mint, became treasures in the hands of collectors, each one a reminder that even in the precision of modern minting, human and mechanical flaws can create rare and valuable pieces. The San Francisco proofs of 1984 also hold a place of distinction. Proof coins are not meant for circulation. Instead, they are carefully struck multiple times on polished planchets, creating a mirror-like surface and frosted details. The 1984 S-proof nickel represents the highest quality of the year's production, a coin intended for collectors and investors. Often preserved in protective cases, these proof nickels embody the artistry of minting at its finest, capturing every line of Jefferson's face, every column of Monticello, and the word liberty written in Jefferson's own handwriting style. But to truly appreciate the Jefferson nickel, we must remember the man it honors. Thomas Jefferson was not only the third president of the United States, he was also the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He was a philosopher, a scientist, an architect, and a statesman who believed deeply in the expansion of knowledge. He doubled the size of the nation through the Louisiana Purchase and sent Lewis and Clark on their journey westward. Monticello, his home, was more than a residence. It was a laboratory of ideas filled with inventions, books, and agricultural experiments. The nickel's design therefore serves as a miniature monument, a pocket-sized tribute to one of the most complex and influential figures in American history. The year 1984 itself is also rich with symbolism. It was the year George Orwell had immortalized in his novel decades earlier, a year that Americans viewed with both caution and curiosity as they compared the real world to the fictional dystopia. It was also a year of cultural transformation, with advances in computers and technology beginning to reshape daily life. Coins, like the 1984 nickel, served as silent witnesses to these transitions, even as paper money, credit cards, and eventually digital transactions grew in importance. Coins still carried historical continuity from generation to generation. Collectors today seek out 1984 Jefferson nickels in high grades, particularly those preserved in mint state condition coins graded by professional. Services such as PCGS or NGC can reveal surprising value, especially if they show full steps on Monticello. The term full steps refers to the clarity of the design detail on the steps leading to Jefferson's home. Many nickels lack this sharpness due to weak strikes, but when the steps are fully visible, the coin becomes much scarcer and more desirable to collectors in circulation. Most 1984 nickels hold only face value 5 cents, but in uncirculated or proof condition, the story changes sharply. Gem quality examples can fetch significant premiums, while error coins command attention for their rarity. The beauty of the Jefferson nickel series lies not just in the coins themselves, but in the journey of discovery. They invite collectors to take, whether one is examining circulation, strikes, hunting for errors, studying proofs, or seeking full steps. Designations: the 1984 nickel offers endless opportunities for learning and collecting. Joy. As the years pass, coins like the 1984 Jefferson nickel become more than mere pocket change. They evolve into historical artifacts, reminders of a particular time in American life when Reagan was in the White House, when Cold War tensions shaped global affairs, and when Americans still relied heavily on coins in daily commerce. Each nickel becomes a small-time capsule, carrying within it the legacy of Jefferson, the craftsmanship of the U.S. Mint, and the economic rhythms of the nation. The story of the 1984 Jefferson nickel is therefore not one of rarity alone, but of continuity, significance, and cultural resonance. It is a coin that connects the founding vision of Jefferson with the everyday lives of millions of Americans in the late 20th century. It is a coin that continues to circulate, reminding us of history even in the most ordinary transactions. And it is a coin that inspires collectors to seek beauty and meaning in the objects that pass unnoticed through so many hands. The Jefferson nickel of 1984 stands as a bridge between past and present, between art and utility, and between the ideals of a nation and the daily reality of its people. The year 1971 stands as a fascinating moment in the continuing journey of American coinage, and few coins represent the economic, cultural, and artistic balance of that period better than the Jefferson nickel of 1971 to appreciate its full importance. We must journey back to the roots of the nickel itself, a denomination that did not even exist in its modern form until the post-Civil War era, when the nation was searching for stability and durability in its circulating currency. The nickel was born out of necessity to replace the half-dime, a silver coin that had long served the nation but had become impractical. As the value of silver rose and small change shortages plagued commerce, by the time 1971 arrived, the Jefferson nickel had already been in circulation for over 3 decades, first introduced in 1938 to honor the third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. The coin was a replacement for the Buffalo nickel, which had been struck from 1913 to 1938. The Jefferson design, created by Felix Schlag, showcased Jefferson's portrait on the obverse and his home Monticello on the reverse, and though subtle modifications were made through the years, its identity remained constant. The 1971 issue therefore represents a continuation of a long series, yet it also reflects the unique pressures and character of the early 1970s. The America of 1971 was experiencing profound change politically, socially, and economically. It was a year that saw the United States deeply engaged in the Vietnam War. The presidency of Richard Nixon was facing mounting challenges, and on the economic side, inflation was beginning to erode the purchasing power of everyday Americans. Coins that once carried silver content had recently been debased, and the nickel itself, though still struck in its traditional copper-nickel composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel, remained one of the most trusted workhorses of commerce. The 1971 Jefferson nickel was produced at 3 mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia Mint struck coins without a mint mark, while Denver issues bore the D mint mark, and San Francisco produced both proof strikes and circulation pieces bearing the S mint mark, the mintage. Figures were significant, with hundreds of millions of nickels being struck that year to meet the demands of a growing population and an economy increasingly reliant on coinage for vending machines, transportation tolls, and daily transactions. Despite their abundance, the nickels of 1971 occupy a meaningful role in numismatic study. Collectors today value the 1971 Jefferson nickel not for intrinsic silver content, but for its historical place in the post-silver era and for the varieties and rarities that exist within the issue. While most coins entered circulation and experienced heavy wear, high-grade examples certified in mint state with full steps on the Monticello reverse remain elusive. The full steps designation refers to the clarity and sharpness of the steps leading up to Jefferson's home, a detail that is notoriously difficult to strike fully because of the design and the quality control of the period. When discussing the San Francisco proofs of 1971, one must recall that these were created specifically for collectors using specially prepared dies and planchets to produce sharp mirrored surfaces and frosted devices. Proof sets of 1971 were sold directly to the public by the mint. And today, these coins provide a glimpse into the minting technology of the early 1970s. These proofs were not merely coins for spending, but miniature works of art intended to preserve history for future generations. The 1971 Jefferson nickel also carries importance because of the broader narrative of American coinage. It was struck at a time when the United States had just officially ended the direct convertibility of the dollar into gold under the Nixon administration with the closure of the gold window in August 1971. The entire financial system entered a new era of fiat currency, and the humble nickel played its part as a circulating token of value at a time when Americans were adjusting to an economy untethered from precious metals, numismatists, and historians alike study the 1971 nickel not simply as a 5-cent piece, but as a mirror of the era. Coins are cultural artifacts. They reveal the artistry of engravers, the efficiency of mints, and the economic policies of governments. The Jefferson nickel of 1971 thus tells us that America was clinging to stability through continuity. Jefferson remained on the coin. Monticello still stood as the reverse design, and the alloy of copper-nickel endured even as the nation's currency system shifted beneath the surface. For the collector today, value lies primarily in condition. Most circulated 1971 nickels are worth face value, but those preserved in pristine mint state with full steps can command significant premiums at auction. Top-graded examples have been known to reach into the hundreds of dollars because of their scarcity and perfect strike quality. The proof issues particularly deep cameo examples with strong contrast between frosted designs and mirrored fields are also prized in the numismatic market. Yet the story does not end with condition and price. The Jefferson nickel of 1971 is part of a series that continues to fascinate collectors because of its longevity and its role as a gateway for new hobbyists, millions of Americans first encounter coin collecting through nickels pulled from change, and the 1971 issue remains a common yet historically rich candidate for study. It links us back to Jefferson himself, to Felix Schlage's artistic vision, to the political and economic challenges of the Nixon era, and to the broader American story. When held in hand, the 1971 nickel may seem ordinary, yet its journey is extraordinary. It passed through the hands of soldiers returning from Vietnam, of workers grappling with inflation, of families purchasing goods in an uncertain economy, each coin a silent witness to a pivotal year in 20th century history. The Jefferson nickel remains one of the longest-running designs in United States coinage history, second only to the Lincoln cent. The 1971 issue occupies a vital middle chapter in that saga, bridging the optimism of the post-war years with the turbulence of the 70s. It is a coin that still circulates today, reminding us that history lives not only in textbooks, but in our pockets. The Jefferson nickel of 1971 carries with it not just the value of a simple 5-cent coin, but the echoes of an entire era in American history. And to understand it fully, we must begin not in 1971 itself, but decades earlier when the United States was deciding what symbols and leaders would best embody its coinage. The decision to replace the Buffalo nickel in 1938 with a new design was not simply about aesthetics, it was about identity. The mint wanted to honor Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, the third president of the United States, and the statesman who doubled the size of the nation through the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson was not only a political leader, but a visionary farmer-inventor and thinker who built Monticello, his home in Virginia, as both a residence and a living laboratory of his ideals. Thus, when Felix Schlage submitted his winning design in 1938, It marked the beginning of one of the most enduring coin series in American history. By the time 1971 arrived, the Jefferson nickel had already been through several turbulent periods, including the silver shortages of World War II, when the nickel alloy itself was altered to preserve the nation's resources from 1942 to 1945. Jefferson nickels were struck with an alloy of silver, manganese, and copper, making those wartime nickels distinctive, both for their large mint marks and their historical context. After 1946, the original copper-nickel alloy returned and carried on through the decades until it found itself in the hands of millions of Americans in 1971, a year unlike many others in the nation's past. The America of 1971 was a nation in transition. Richard Nixon was president, the Vietnam War raged on campuses, and city streets filled with protests. Inflationary pressures were mounting, and in August of that year, Nixon announced the suspension of the gold standard, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system and placing the United States fully onto a fiat currency system. In such a moment, coins took on a paradoxical role. On the one hand, they were everyday tools of commerce worth only the value assigned by the government. On the other, they became lasting artifacts of a moment of change struck in. Metal and preserved in history, the Jefferson nickel of 1971 therefore is not only a coin, but a witness to the year when American money itself broke away from its centuries-old tie to gold.